It's all about peace, spreading love in the world. So I gotta represent rebels for joy, positivity. You know that we're all about it. Magic happens when you align your purpose, passion, and power. Just believe in your greatness. I know for sure the light that you radiate too strong to ignore. Emotional revolution. It's time that we start. Love, we need more. We are rebels for joy. Woo!
Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Rebels for Joy. I am one of your rebellion leaders, Bonnie Kelly, and today, you guys, we've got some dude energy coming in here to represent that masculine, the masculine side, and talk about how he has prevailed through these different experiences where he was robbed for joy. You guys, his story is captivating. In fact, this will be one of the first places and the first times that he's going to share this story with the universe. And we're just so honored to have him here. Hey, Evans, how are you? I'm going to do an intro, but I just at least want to acknowledge and say, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Bonnie. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on, too. This is going to be fun.
Yes. Well, you guys, for those of you who don't know Evans, he is a powerhouse podcaster. He works with coaches and speakers and authors, helping them to make more money with high ticket strategies, creating quantum leaps. He's got a podcast called the Infinite Impact Radio Podcast. You guys can actually find a really cool episode with me on there as well. He has been in the industry for a long time. He's got a track record that just proves that he is so good at what he does in launching podcasts and helping people really monetize that. If you're an entrepreneur, this is a really cool person that you want to connect with. He's got a free community that you can join where you can enter the vault, and it gives you access to a lot of the different tricks and secrets that you can use to help you elevate your brand and business as well. But Evans, as you know, we're not having you on here to talk about business today, are we?
No, I don't. Not really. No, in an indirect way, but yeah, no, not at all.
Yeah. Because you and I were talking. You were interviewing me for your podcast, and you started to share. I mean, you and I just took it to a very authentic, very real place really quick. And I think that's rare. I think a lot of conversations, it's really everybody puts on that front, puts on that mask and says like, oh, look at all the success I have. And you and I just kind of bared it all. And you shared with me a powerful, impactful story that I knew immediately that our audience needed to hear. And so I just so grateful and so honored that you're willing to be vulnerable and share this with our crew today.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to it, actually. Like you said, I haven't really shared it in a venue like this. It's some one-on-ones, like meeting people like yourself and calls, but not out publicly in such a, I guess, amplified type of way.
Yeah. So before we get into that, we love spreading the joy. And you were one of the brave souls that said, Bonnie, I've got a joke for you today. So let's hit our audience up with a little bit of cheesy, corny awesomeness. What you got today, Evans?
All right. So as I told you, I wrote it down because my daughter likes to remind me, Dad, you're horrible at telling jokes. You always forget them. So the delivery may not be amazing, but I'm going to share it anyway. So why was the cat always chosen last for the basketball team?
Cat chosen last for the basketball team. I'm not sure. Tell me.
He was always shooting hairballs.
The reason why that cracks me up is because my cat is notorious for hacking up hairballs, and it is the worst thing ever.
We're telling us that, and my cat George is laying here giving me this like evil look, like, "Are you talking about me?" But yeah, it's fun. But the reason I thought this was perfect. We actually asked the lady in the other room, that we have to all whisper her name, Alexa. So I didn't want to say that loud because other people listening, all of a sudden it might set off their machines. But we asked her the joke, and it popped up. I was like, "That's perfect," and it sort of fits into what we're going to talk about because when I was a lot younger growing up, basketball was like my refuge. It's where I went outside as an only child and I would sort of escape from the day-to-day world, everything. And that's what I did was I just sort of went directly. That was my way, my outlet for dealing with a lot of things emotionally was through basketball. And then I love cats and my daughter loved cats. And I'm like, this is like this joke was given to me for a reason to share. So
I love it. I love it. And just so you guys know, his 9-year-old daughter helped him craft this awesome joke to make sure that he was delivering
Yes.
it like a pro on today's show. So we're so excited about that. So let's get into this. Because many of us had to adapt coping mechanisms as well to survive our childhood. I know, especially if anybody's heard my story before, that they understand that I had to develop mine to help me mentally, emotionally through. So tell us why you needed a coping mechanism. Tell us about your childhood and how that began to rob you of your joy.
Well, it's funny because I think I shared this with you, but my childhood there wasn't like anything, outlandishly horrible from the outside that people would see. I mean, I never really lacked for anything, I wasn't spoiled, but I didn't go without.
Yeah.
And we lived in a nice neighborhood, and I was able to have the things that other people had, but at home, I didn't really my father was just not there emotionally, mentally at all. It was a total disconnect. He worked all the time. And at the time when I was younger, I didn't really understand what was going on. I just knew that, he worked all the time. When he came home from work, there was no connection whatsoever between the two of us. It was just a total disconnect. And so I didn't really have that kind of support. And, I had an amazing mother who probably was a little overzealous to try to compensate for what I was lacking. But so I found myself to where, I didn't feel like I could share, like I was just a little more emotionally, quiet, possibly, I guess is a good word for it. I wasn't very vocal about what I was going through. I didn't have anybody to talk to about the things I was going through growing up. And so I think a lot of that outlet was I used basketball for a coping mechanism, because I could go get in my own head and get in my own world and imagine, that I'm playing a basketball game. And it's funny is because I carry that on now. Today, I still use that when I'm stuck and I'm trying to think of something for my business or something that I can't get an answer. A lot of times I'll go over here and shoot baskets, but it's for a different thing now. It's like I can get into the flow and just let the answers come to me. But from the outside, you would have never known that, it was like we were a family that was in the social, people knew who we were. From the outside, it looked like everything was okay. We went to all the right things. We went to the right places.
Yeah.
But a lot of that was for my father's lack in the things that he was looking for, because he wanted to make sure that people saw us in a specific kind of light.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this is extremely common. It's like that white picket fence syndrome is what I call it, is that everybody puts up that white picket fence. They don't want the world to see the reality. And so they put on these masks and they pretend that everything's okay, and they're not coping and they're not dealing with it. But what I want to ask you really quick here, and I know I'm injecting right in the middle of your story, but I think it's so important with these generational male stigmas that are out there about men not having a place to process their emotions and to deal with their emotions. So tell me about, like, how did that affect you as a child, and how did it affect you really more in your adulthood, where you didn't learn how to cope with your emotions? And then we'll loop right back and jump back right here in the story if you're okay with that.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I think a lot of it, by not having that, my self-esteem was never in a good place emotionally or mentally. But as I grew older, the way I coped really was just to go inside. Because I didn't, I was also growing up in a time, like you said, where the men didn't really, there was no you don't show your feelings. And I also grew up where, this is the way we're going to tell people things happen. It was almost, I'm from the South, and there seems to be this thing in the South where you cover up the truth with fantastic stories of some type. So it's like, what's the story we're going to tell them? And it's like, and now I look back and why don't we just tell them the truth? It's like, but Yeah, so that led me to going inside. It's funny because my wife and I went to high school together, but didn't really know each other. But from her perspective, everybody thought I was this guy that was stuck up, that was thought all of this, thought of himself as better than everybody because I didn't talk to people. I had a little core group of friends. So I went inside with all my emotions and I never learned to deal with them. So as I got older, I started finding an escape in, not heavy drugs, but, I smoked a lot of pot when I was younger, drank a lot. And that's really how I coped with it, was by going through that. And then as I got a little farther along, I started getting into exercise and working out as I sort of came through one phase. And I found myself in that. I wasn't working out to enjoy it. I almost found myself like punishing myself for being the behaviors that caused me to get out of shape and not, healthy. I sort of went the opposite. So it was always a way to cope by almost, going too far, overindulging in almost anything that I could find, I would overindulge in.
Yeah. And this is so relevant because all of us have these different types of coping mechanisms that'll appear. And it takes a lot of awareness to begin to identify them because we can blame them on outside influences, right? Well, I'm overweight and I'm, working out because I have to, but not recognizing or making the connection that no, this is a way that I'm punishing myself because I feel disappointed in me, because I feel bad about who I am. And when we're not taught to deal with those types of emotions, and all we know how to do is suppress them and keep them silent and tell, false stories, then we're learning and conditioned to believe that all of those emotions are bad and thus we are bad. And then that shows up, and I know that shows up later in your story as well. But let's get back to this picket fence for a second, because this is so good, Evans. And I'm so glad that you're sharing all of this, because there's so many men and women that can begin to make the connections with themselves where they're wearing the mask, where they are still coping as a way to, to just get through or to process beyond these emotions that they haven't dealt with yet. So I know that your family then hit a very pivotal point, right? Everything's suppressed, everything's under the rug, and then it just hits a head. So tell us what happened.
So that was as I got older. It was funny because I sort of chipped away at a lot of things as I was going along. Like I started realizing that I was coping in certain ways, and they were destructive instead of helpful. And so slowly I would chip away. Like the exercise thing actually turned into a good thing later, where I realized that, and I was able to use that in a means to serve other people as I became a personal trainer. And it was during this transition period where the story that you're alluding to, that I was a little bit older, I was ready to move back to where I live now. And in transition, I spent about a week at my parents' house, and this is on the coast of North Carolina. And one night, and at this time, at this point, my father, things had started unraveling a little bit because he had lost his business, because he sort of got pushed out of his business. He didn't lose it because of bankruptcy. He got pushed out. Things started getting uncovered. And like some of these things started popping up where you start realizing, okay, he's not telling the truth. He's lied a lot through his life. He sort of cheated his way through a lot of business deals. And, these were things that we never knew. And this was starting to come out. And he also, at the time, we sort of noticed that he was having some mental issues. Like, you could tell when you talked to him sometimes that he was like, he wasn't all there. And some of the things he was saying they were getting a little bit out there. And so I'm spending the night down there one night, and it's just me. I'm an only child. So it's me, my mother, my father, and one of our cats, of all things. There's always a cat in our family, it seems like. And, I'm sleeping, and you can almost still hear it, and it can make my hair stand up on my arms. But I heard this like blood curdling scream of my name, and I'm sleeping, dead asleep. So I sort of wake up, and how you feel, you're like, okay, was that real? Am I in a dream? And I heard it again. And the second time I heard it, I probably got out of bed faster than I've ever gotten out of bed before. And I like go rushing out, run downstairs, and my mom is just standing there shaking. And at the top of the stairs, there's a hammer. And what had happened is that my mom was sitting there having breakfast, and he came walking behind her. And I don't know what, triggered her to sort of stop and turn, but he was standing behind her with a claw hammer. And his goal was he told her point blank, he's like, I'm going to kill you. And then I'm going upstairs and killing, our son while he's asleep. And then I'm killing the cat. And so she got up, she screamed, she started chasing, he started trying to get away from him, but it was her yelling my name those 2 times that sort of triggered something in him where he dropped the hammer and left. And, so that was like, it was just this intense moment where I was like, okay, is this what our reality just totally 180 degrees changed. And the good, there's good and bad in everything. And and I'll say right now, the best thing that came out of that was my mother and I had always been close, but it had always been like, I felt like I had like this mama bird hovering over me all the time. And this was like my turn, my chance to be her rock and for both of us to work together. And we started talking, and I started talking more, and I started sharing more. And that really took me from the point of never sharing emotions, never speaking up, never talking about these kind of things to, at this point, it's like, okay, what else could happen? I might as well do it. And it brought us really close together. And it was really a pivotal in many ways, but even for my self growth, it's like it flipped a switch on and changed everything.
That's so powerful, Evans. I mean, and thank you so much for sharing this with us, because it could have definitely went a different direction. When people experience trauma or pain like this, is that it can trigger that fight, flight, freeze, and appease. And for many of us, we can find ourselves picking up even deeper or more, like bigger coping mechanisms. It could shut us down more. It could pull us away further. And for you, it became this catalyst for growth. It became this pivotal point to allow you to start to realize the impact of not speaking your truth can have. The impact of hiding and lying, to an extent, about the true nature of what you feel and the struggles that you're going through. And I think that's just such a powerful message that everyone needs to hear, especially in today's society.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing that was we never expected it to come to that. We knew he was starting to have some mental problems, and he had dealt with this a lot in the past, but like everything else, at least in my world, it was not shared with me. It was sort of, what's the story we're going to tell our son? What's the story we're going to tell everybody? So the thing that I'd let everybody know that's listening too is that, there wasn't anything going on when I was younger. There was no, verbal abuse, physical abuse, anything like that. It was just a total disconnect and the non-supportive atmosphere from my father, not from my mother. But yeah, then it came to this head, and then, it really, there were some scary moments. Like there was a point where he ended up they had to take him to a mental hospital, and, they couldn't keep him. So they had to let him out. So his brother comes to pick him up, drives him, 3 hours away. Next thing you know, like a couple days later, my mom gets a phone call saying that, your husband's gone, my car's gone, and guess what? My gun's gone. And then somebody sees him driving around down where my mother lives. So it's like, we lived in this for probably another year at least. Wow. We lived under this cloud of, sort of looking over your shoulder and worrying, because at this point we were totally disconnected. And it turns out that, when he did pass away, basically he just totally disowned me, because I was no longer the loyal son. I wasn't there for him. And I'm thinking, well, why should I still be there for him? Because I chose sides. But of course, what are you supposed to do at this point? But so it was a lot to go through. And I think because I did start expressing myself better. I was able to handle it better moving forward. Now, there were some rough times moving forward where I did find myself coping, by probably drinking too much, and my mother even worried about me. And a lot of that changed when I met my wife, who, like I said, we went to high school together, but I actually dated her sister in high school a couple times. And, but once we met, and I felt like that connection with her in a different way than I'd ever felt before, just this comfort, this friendship and everything and support, that it was from that point is really when things started changing. And then, like you said, I have a daughter. So once my daughter came along, I was like, I look back at this as a blessing. Like, okay, I may have had a father that was this way, but I didn't learn from him how to be a good father, but I learned how not to be that kind of father, which made me be able to find, a much better place in my world to be a better father.
Yeah, sometimes those are the greatest lessons. So talk to me really quickly about the path to recovery from this, right? So I don't want to paint this picture that you just magically started this personal development path and it was just like, oh, that was easy to just really be able to shift. And it was such a blessing, because I know that there's a journey to get to that, right? There's a journey for that. And a lot of times that journey takes us on a place where it just really robs us of joy. We find ourselves in a lot of pain. So what do you think were some of the pivotal key lessons or the pivotal key things that you did to help you along that journey to recovery from that emotional trauma?
Well, like I said, one was starting to finally open up and speak instead of trying to like, what's the story we're going to tell? It's like just being authentic and being, who I am.
Did you find that was hard at first?
Yeah. I mean, it's something even over the past year has really been like the most growth. So we're looking at, I'm trying to think of the age now. It's probably been at least 11 years since that incident. So even through the first years of my life with my wife and child, I wasn't in a great place. So there were pivotal moments, and some of the pivotal moments that kept triggering growth were after I would maybe explode in anger at my daughter and then like sit there and think, why did I get so angry over something like that? Something just ridiculously and trivial. And I'm sure a lot of parents go through this at times, but the more things like that happened, I started sort of stepping outside of myself and looking at it from a different lens. Like, okay, what could I have done differently? What could I have done better? That really sort of triggered it as well. So there was a lot of tough times just where I reverted back to the old way of like, hey, I can just, sit here and drink so much that I don't remember anything, that I don't have to deal with it. But then as I became a parent, started moving into this new world, it was like, I can't keep doing that anymore. That's just not going to work. It's being selfish. I might as well be as bad a father as I had.
Yeah.
So those were the kind of things. It was just moving this. I think business is what really helped it too, as well. Like moving into, I joined a coaching program 3 years ago. It was very beneficial. I started to, build a network of other people, other entrepreneurs who are also have gone through a lot of things and are also very successful. But we have this bond that we're both entrepreneurs, we're all entrepreneurs. We're all going through this journey. And that bond has really helped me go from where I would never make new friends. I had my core group of friends from when I was younger. That was it. To now, I have friends like all over the world that I've met through this coaching program, and just sharing stories. And another thing I think that's really been beneficial has been the podcast that I started. Even though it's only like 17 episodes in, I interview people like yourself and like these other amazing entrepreneurs that I talk to. And I always find out about their backstory and where they started and what triggered them to go on the purposeful path that they're on. And it's been a lot of inspiration. It's almost been therapy for me doing that podcast, as well as sharing it with the listeners. I'm like, I'm sort of selfish. If I didn't even have any listeners, I would keep doing it.
Yeah.
So things like that have been really helpful in self-growth, because they sort of pulled me out of, being, not being selfish, but maybe just being inside of myself and not sharing as much, to seeing other people share and then slowly having them pull it out of me. And then more and more it starts coming out.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a willingness to be vulnerable. And so many of us associate vulnerability as a weakness, whereas takes a tremendous amount of strength to share that story, to be vulnerable, to be seen, to expand beyond our comfort zone of what we know. And for you, that was expanding beyond the comfort zone of the friends that you knew, and really putting yourself in this place. Because I know you took a big leap from, working with a very successful, top rated podcaster. You helped build that brand, you helped build them, and then deciding, I'm going to do my own jam. I'm going to do my own thing. And then taking that leap into the entrepreneurial world for yourself. And now just, this journey is that it runs parallel with your personal journey as well. Right? And your personal, as it's growing, you're growing. As you're finding more of a voice in your business, you're finding more of a voice in your personal life. And I love how the two of those always can become so intertwined. I think what's really powerful to highlight here is that, you got help. It was really that willingness to say, hey, I want support with this, joining a coaching program, joining, a team to support you in bringing this to light and sharing this to the world, and recognizing that by doing so, it not only helps you, but it helps so many around you.
Yeah. And it was nice too, and I will bring this up too, is having my really core group of friends that I've had since I was, elementary school, some of them, maybe even younger. But there's like 3, 4, 5, or 6 of them or so that they knew what I'd been through, but we didn't really broadcast to the world that, hey, my father tried to kill us. But they knew and they understood, and they were there for me quietly without expecting me to share it with them, which I thought was really awesome. And just that, you just knew that, hey, you're welcome anytime. We're here for you. And I will say this too, because I thought of this as we were talking. Another thing that really helped me get through this process was when I moved back here, after this event happened, back to where I live now in Charleston, South Carolina. I remembered how much I loved basketball again. I remembered how much I loved working with others and helping them as a personal trainer. And I went to the Boys and Girls Club here in my local area, and I was talking to them about volunteering, and I actually created an after-school basketball program for these kids that had nowhere else to go and didn't have this. And I spent time with them, serving them. And I also worked as a big brother with another middle school kid and helped him, where I would just show up every now and then at lunch, and we'd throw the football and talk, because he didn't have a father. He was living with his grandparents. And that, those things were the most rewarding, because I think the gift was not me being there for them. It was actually them being there for me.
Yeah.
So that really lifted me up and reminded me that, hey, you don't need to sit here and be, by yourself and like deal with this alone. There's other people that have problems too, and you can go help them. And by helping them, it really sort of lifted me, out of that fog as well.
Yeah, so good. So good. Because I think that we do get lost in our own stories, and then we hide from it, and we've become paralyzed as a result from it. And when we can start to begin to help other people, to recognize that you're capable of helping other people, it opens up this ability for healing to really take place. So before I let you go, Evans, I really want to touch on one more key component piece that we didn't talk about, but I do believe that there's an element here. How did forgiveness play a role in your recovery?
Oh, it was huge. I mean, over this past, like I said, the past year has really been my big momentum builder.
Yeah.
That all started with, as you said, I left the previous successful business right as we were ascending. We were doing great. And I decided, okay, I'm tired of being behind the curtain. Plus, I feel like I have a gift that I've shared with my business partner to help with his purpose that I can give to other people. So I took the time when I left that business to focus on myself first.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I had to keep reminding myself, okay, I'm not hustling and grinding. I'm focused more on my morning routine, which was, gratitude, meditation, reading something spiritual, drinking a lot of water, exercise. I had this, I had something planned out every morning. And I was listening to a podcast one day, and Russell Brunson, who's one of my mentors, and he's the head of the coaching group I'm in, was talking about forgiveness, like the number one gift every entrepreneur can give themselves. I might be butchering that, but it sounds right now. So, but he talked about forgiveness. And so that made me really think about this. And this over this past year was the first time I'd ever sat down and really focused on forgiving my father. You know, I had told myself before, you know, he came from a family where his father was never at home, was an alcoholic, was a gambler, dirt poor. The mother was verbally and emotionally abusive. So I would always tell, you know, like he had never dealt with his issues, and it all came to a point. So I tried to like justify it in a way, but never forgive him.
Yeah.
So I finally, you know, as I was sitting there quietly after listening to that podcast, because he actually said in the podcast, if there's anybody you need to forgive, as soon as you turn off this podcast, go sit quietly. He's like, I don't know if you're religious, if you're not, if you are, pray, whatever you do, meditate, but go think about that person and, you know, forgive them.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I sat down and I visualized like my father and I actually together, and forgiving him. And the key to this, and I'll say this too, because I felt the relief, I felt things changed a little bit, but I also learned a big lesson was that I still hadn't forgiven myself.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't him necessarily that, you know, that was a big part. That was a huge part of it. Make no mistake about it. But I was still living in the world of, hey, you did all of this when you could have been so much better.
Yeah.
You had all these gifts, and instead you were wasting them. You were doing this, you were not. And I was beating myself up. And then it was in one of my podcast interviews where there's this really wonderful lady that I've met. Her name's Carla White. She created the gratitude app. It's an app I use to do gratitude every morning. And she came on my podcast and she said something. And at this moment I had remembered it, but I asked her, I'm like, what is one thing you would tell people right now that are listening that they could do to make a huge impact on their world? And hers was like, you know, just give yourself a little grace, forgive yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it hit me. And I was like, I have not forgiven the most important person yet.
Yeah.
So from that point, I had to start, you know, and it was harder work for me to forgive myself than it was for my father.
Always
for,
is.
you know,
Yeah.
all the things I'd done in the past. And I wasn't a horrible, bad person, but it was like, I could have done so much more. But then now through all of this, as you know, you get this wisdom. You're like, this is the way it was supposed to be. If I wouldn't have done all of this, if I wouldn't have had all of this, I couldn't go out and share and help others and serve others the way I can now.
Yeah.
So forgiveness was huge, forgiving him and then forgiving myself as well.
Yeah.
And then every day, what she was saying too was really important. Every day, remember to forgive yourself. If you don't have your best day, I tell my daughter this all the time. I'm like, be your best today. But then if I have like a little mistake, I beat myself up. It's like, I need to treat myself the way I treat my daughter, you know, tell her to forgive herself. Forgive yourself if you don't have the best day every moment, because that's really, I think, a magic formula. If you start forgiving yourself and giving yourself some grace, it gives you permission to step into life bigger.
Yeah. You know, and I think one of the biggest misnomers in forgiveness is people think it's just something they do once and they can be done. And forgiveness is something you have to do over and over and over again before it generates the feeling of forgiveness. Sometimes it's a conscious choice before it ever generates a feeling. And, you know, that's why I had to touch on that. I knew that it had to been forgiveness in there somewhere, because, you know, that transformation, you know, from that pain and that disconnect to this place where now you can see the bigger purpose, you can see and understand how this is serving you in such a big way, is that journey there is sometimes messy, right? It's ugly, and it requires us to constantly peel back the layers, to look within. And I think that you're a great shining example of that, Evans. I think you're a great example of somebody who has been conditioned to be emotionally numbed out, tuned out, to having a pivotal point, a tragedy, to now getting to this place where it's like now you're serving the world. And I think that this is a powerful message, and I'm grateful that you shared it with our group girls today.
Well, thank you. And I mean, I think it really is important to, I mean, for me now, I feel like it's my mission just to show other people that, hey, you know, you have, no matter how small you think it is, it's huge. It's somebody out there wants to hear that message, needs to hear your message.
Yeah.
And I like to think of it as, if you think of, you know, if you get a giant boulder and drop it into a lake, it creates a ripple, but guess what? So does a tiny little pebble. So you might think that what you have to share is not humongous, is not a huge boulder, is not worthy. You know, you're not Tony Robbins. Well, guess what? Tony Robbins would tell you that you have something that somebody wants and needs and desires to hear right now. So I try to share that with everybody. And I do that. That's really the reason that I started the podcast, was like, you know what? I don't know why I'm doing this podcast yet. I don't have an end goal, but I know it's to get other people to share their messages to create a positive ripple effect throughout the world.
Yeah.
So that's really important. You know, no matter where you are in the journey, you've got something to share that somebody needs to hear.
Amen to that. Yeah. So if you're listening to this, you guys, hopefully that especially that final message is really sinking in, to recognize that you have something to share, sister. Like, this world needs you. It needs your gifts. And sometimes it requires us to just do a little polishing, to get a little support, to have new insight or intel that wasn't available before. And so if you need any support with that, Evan's here for you. We, as your Rebellion leaders, are here to support you. Evans, thank you so much for being here, being present. Where can people find you if they want to connect? Of course, we'll link all the show notes, but where's your favorite place to hang out?
Probably on Facebook. You can find me, you know, and we can jump in. If you send me a friend request, you know, the thing I like about it is being able to send a voice message back and forth to each other, just to connect. Cause I actually like to not just accept friend requests, but actually like to connect with people.
Yeah.
And, so you can find me on Facebook. It's just Evans Putman. And I think there's two of us, and one is my page and one is me. So either way, you're going to connect with me. So that's probably the best way. But you can also find me on Instagram at Evans Putman.
Yeah.
And then, as I was telling you before, I've started something new with our podcast, where I've opened up the vault for my Impact Influencer tribe. So everybody that wants to come in and get some positive messages, some great videos from some of my guests like yourself, with great, you know, impactful actions you can put into your daily life. I'm loading up this thing. It's a free members area, and it's you can find it at infiniteimpactmethod.com/vault.
Cool.
So it's VAULT. So come over there. It's free, and lots of cool stuff is in there to help you guys out. So
yeah, awesome. All right, and you know we love to end this show with one powerful message. And so, Evans, say it loud, say it proud for our girls.
All right. My name is Evans Putman, and I'm a rebel of joy.
Woo! Thank you, my friend. We appreciate you so much for being here. And thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.